everybody in YouTube land. I am so excited to be with you today for this very special interview that I'm having with Joseph Selbie. Hello, Joseph, and welcome to Guiding Star Astrology.
Thanks for having me on the show again. It was a pleasure last time. I'm expecting a pleasure again.
Absolutely. Now, as Joseph just mentioned, he has been on the channel before, and at that time we discussed this book, The Yuga Cycle. I do recommend checking out that video that we did. It's in my astrology discussions playlist. But today we're actually talking about this book, The Physics of God, an amazing book. Actually, you've been interviewed by Deepak Chopra about this book, I understand, Joseph.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Deepak Chopra's work. And so that must have been quite a buzz to be interviewed by him.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
maybe
It
it
was
was,
a pleasure.
yeah, or maybe he was quite buzzed to be interviewing you, I imagine, as well.
Well, it was very collegial. He talked to me with his level of understanding and felt that I could follow him and vice versa. So it was a very free flow of information back and forth.
Because you both deal with similar topics in your research and work. But he's very much into dark matter, I know, at the moment. But what we're looking at here, it's the physics of, and you have a background in physics, so maybe I should allow you to explain your background to people aside from the meditation that you teach and the lectures that you give, and perhaps you could share your background in studies and interest in physics, and perhaps what led you, Joseph, to write a book called The Physics of God.
Well, I grew up in a family that was very science oriented. I like to joke that uh, conversations at the dinner table required references. You couldn't get away with just saying such and such is true. You have to be able to make a comment that backs it up with
I love
some
that.
book or other
Yeah,
source. So,
evidence-based.
yeah.
Mm.
So I grew up with that kind of rigorous, logical, rational, scientific approach to things. And I went off to college thoroughly expecting to get a degree in some aspect of science. I was very into molecular biology,
Mhm.
but simultaneously, the universe had additional plans for me, maybe not different plans, but additional plans. I discovered the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. I began to meditate. I had some profound experiences taking hallucinogenic drugs. And they really, all of those combined, put my feet squarely on the path of meditation, seeking self realization, which led me to the Ananda community where I still live. Over 50 years ago, I arrived here. And so the bulk of my experience in life has been living a spiritual life within the context of a spiritual community. But I never lost my love of science. I never lost the interest I had. I was extremely pleased to see books like Fritjof Capra's The Tao of Physics and Zhukov's The Dancing Woolly Masters come out. And I avidly read those kind of books and all articles and scientific papers that I could find. And of course, with the advent of the internet, all of that became much, much more accessible. And it finally allowed me to write this book, which had been sort of, rotating around in the back of the mind literally for 20 years or more. And it allowed me to combine what I understand of spirituality with what I'd come to understand of the sort of leading edge theories of physics. And just an interesting note, not something that I had expected to find, but I was delighted to find that Yogananda's writings are very much in the Western vernacular, even though with a name like that. You would know he's from India, but he taught to Americans and he used concepts that Americans could understand, which included science. So in his writings, he makes references to physics, to chemistry, to neuroscience, and everything in between. So his writings are really filled with some of the foundational ideas that I was able to work from to write this book. When he died in 1952, some of the more important discoveries in physics had yet to be made, having to do with string theory and eventually with M theory, which are a big part of my book. But the foundation is still the writings and teachings of Yogananda.
That's fabulous. Like, I've just been away, as we've been talking about before I pressed record on this interview, to the Flinders Ranges, a highly energetic area where I had the chance to read this book while I was on break. And I just kept getting so excited by things in the book that I could see pertaining to I'll call it the science of astrology, how astrology actually works in this universe where sometimes you can't see or record or analyze what is causing an effect. So
Right.
I was just so thrilled to read this book and see these connections as an astrologer myself. So there's so much beauty and depth in this book. And you've actually just released a course about the physics of God, detailing a lot of the work that's in the book. Do you want to tell us perhaps a little bit about the course?
Well, the course is draws on a lot of information from the book, but it also adds more of the sort of spiritual practices that are a foundation of the book in each of seven 90-minute classes. And it's being hosted by Shift Network, which many people already know about. And we'll begin in the beginning of October. October 7th will be the first class. But it's been a pleasure to and an honor to take this material and put it into course format, because a lot of people get more out of hearing it spoken and seeing images, which I couldn't provide in the book, to kind of flesh out the picture that modern physics paints of very, very subtle realities that match the very, very subtle realities that we know from spiritual teachings.
I actually think it's essential that astrologers and aspiring astrologers read this book or do your course to understand what's going on in the universe, the background behind what we share in astrology. For example, it seems to me that the book really highlights the difference between logical understandings of reality and experiential understandings of reality, of God or matter or reality. And so, to my mind, that really ties into astrology, because the more you experience astrology, and you know what you're looking at, of course, the more it makes sense. The more things are solidified by the experience that you have, rather than just head knowledge. What do you think about that correspondence of logic to experience?
Well, fortunately and unfortunately, science adopted a perspective on the pursuit of truth that ruthlessly eliminates subjective experience.
Mm.
So if it can't be measured with scientific instruments, they're not interested in speculating really even on the existence of things like consciousness and the more subtle aspects of the reality in which we live, such as the influences, subtle influences that are part of astrology.
Mm.
So that's the unfortunate side. The fortunate side is that this rigorous approach to finding the nature of reality through this strict experimental process um, means that whatever they finally get to has a very, very solid foundation in experimentation. But the unfortunate side, in my mind, outweighs the fortunate aspect of that, because what it has not only done is, to most scientists' way of thinking, is not just that we can't comment on that because we can't measure it. They go a step further. The unfortunate step further is, and therefore it doesn't exist.
Mm, mm.
And that conclusion, which is backed up by many, many voices in science, has led many people to think that in fact, subtle reality doesn't exist. Consciousness doesn't exist, that there's nothing beyond matter and the energies like electromagnetism that interact with matter that are the cause of everything we experience. And this really limits science's view, and also limits where they tend to want to go experiment, where they want to explore, and they keep it very tightly in that what's
Control.
called scientific materialism
Mm,
avenue. So that's the unfortunate aspect of this strict adherence to the scientific principle.
mm.
But still, they've discovered an amazing amount. And I think that there are, in fact, there was a Pew study done in 2009, I believe, um, which interviewed a couple of thousand scientists about their opinions on various things. And one of them was, um, do they have any spiritual beliefs of their own? And a surprising number did have, like
Oh,
51% of the scientists interviewed believed in God or higher power or higher intelligence. And it was a smaller group, around 40%, that strictly believed in the scientific materialist view of reality. So even among scientists in which that views, has a lot of hold, even among them, there are a number who just see past the limitations and realize that there has to be some deeper explanations
yeah.
for the phenomenon that have already been acknowledged, if not understood. I call them the big three. The big three is, where did the universe come from?
Hmm.
This Big Bang is great, but where did this much energy, and we're talking about a stupendous amount of energy, burst into being in a three-dimensional reality and started actually creating space? There was no space in which the Big Bang occurred. It created space, matter, and energy all in the same instant. So where did that come from, right?
Hmm.
And then within the context of this universe that that Big Bang is creating, um, where did life come from? Life is far, far from being explainable by the known laws of science. It's almost impossibly complex for life to have formed accidentally, which is
That's
the
right.
main argument.
Yeah.
And then finally, where does consciousness come from? So science tends to say it's a epiphenomenon. It arises out of the interactions of the neurons in our brain, which are electrical, and some scientists believe they are quantum in their interaction, and that somehow, in some way, yet to be unexplained, and which is completely untestable. Nonetheless, many scientists are convinced that this is where consciousness arises. It arises in the brain. It's a product of the brain, and it's only a matter of time before scientific materialism can explain it. But if you look closely at their arguments, they're not even theories, they're conjectures, they're ideas. They're sort of, what if this kind of thing could happen in the brain? And somebody else would say, well, yeah, that'd be great. Might create consciousness, but they're not even close. So the big three, and they're really the most important three: origin of the universe, origin of life, and origin of consciousness, have not, and I believe cannot be explained by um, the science paradigm as it exists. The exciting thing is that physicists, physics in general, is pushing that boundary
Right.
and going beyond some of the limitations that I've already outlined to give us some glimpses of how those three things might have come in ways completely, I think, unexpected by most people who understand the basics of science,
Mm.
completely surprised them as to how subtle, perhaps, the creation of the universe is rather than this one moment of Big Bang.
Yes. Well, I have a quote from the book here that I thought I'd just share, which I thought was just wonderful. And it ties into what you're talking about. I'll just read from page 40. The fact that we are mostly insensible to the world around us, the fact is that we are mostly insensible to the world around us. It is safe to say that our senses simply cannot detect more than 99.9% of the wavelengths, frequencies, and vibrating substances that are actually present. If we could perceive reality fully, the picture we would have in our mind's eye would be almost completely different from the picture our senses allow us to perceive. And so it surprises me that science can be so adamant about something or a theory when there's that great gap, if you like, that between perception and provability.
Yeah, it's a great point you raise. That particular point, scientists would just say that it's a protection mechanism that we evolved only to see a fairly narrow perspective of electromagnetic energy, which we see as visible light, and that if we did see all the 99.9% other energies that are floating around, we would just be living in an undifferentiated sea of light. Um, but as we know, as many know from reading the lives of saints and mystics and sages, it is possible to transcend that limitation and, in fact, to experience the universe, the reality behind the universe, as pure energy. And that it's not an undifferentiated mass of light, it's a coordinated um, image of reality that people who in near-death experiences experience as the heavens, that saints talk about as being full of light and full of love and full of joy. But all of those perceptions are beyond sensory perception.
Mm, mm. And you do talk quite extensively, or have done a lot of research about near-death experiences, and tie that in to the book quite a lot, which I really loved, actually.
Yeah, near-death experiencers uh, are very confirming of the sort of basic universal spiritual teachings, which I'll simplify just to a few points, that there is an infinite intelligent God. They
Mhm.
don't all use the word God, talk about a spirit or just an intelligence, but it's a knowable, uh, infinite presence, and that they also experience in their near-death experiences that they are a inseparable part of that, that their soul is one with that infinite consciousness, and that we're all in a learning process. We are in an incarnation. Most of us, the near-death experiences are temporarily out of their incarnation for a brief bit, but most of us are still in the body, and we're learning in various ways how to grow in awareness and how to transcend the limitation of the senses so that we can not only perceive more, but that we can perceive more deeply. We can perceive deep into these kind of subtle realities that we think of as the heavens, as the astral regions, the subtle formless lights of that deeper reality. So that basic idea that we're all going to school, we're all essentially an integral part of the divine, and that the divine is drawing us inexorably back into that awareness, and that we're all in that process of learning. This is what is pretty much echoed by every near-death experiencer.
It's
When
interesting when
they,
we're speaking about what is consciousness and the scientific perception of what consciousness actually is. I couldn't help but thinking about the near-death experiences who prove that our consciousness exists beyond the life of the body and the firing of the neurons in our brain. So it's wonderful to read those stories in the Physics of God about that. In fact, you mentioned John von Neumann in the book, and just he purported that I'm just going to quote here: consciousness doesn't merely affect reality; consciousness creates reality. And I just thought maybe you could talk to that idea.
well, that's the big sort of mirror opposition, if you will, of material science and spiritual science. Is material science is looking for all those big three questions to be explained by how atoms and molecules and electromagnetism and gravity, et cetera, all interact to somehow in some way produce them, where in spiritual teachings, we have the notion of a infinite intelligent consciousness that in fact creates matter.
Mm.
Or another way you can say it is, it's not, the brain doesn't create consciousness, consciousness creates the brain. That
Yes.
consciousness coming down, if you will, in stages creates thought, and then creates energy, and then finally creates matter. But it all is empowered and directed by this infinite intelligent consciousness, which, you call it spirit, call it source, call it God, call it the one. It's really the same reality, just being described in different times from different cultures.
Yes, yes. And I mean, without giving away too much of the information that is in your book, and the course, you share a bit about other dimensional realities in there. Do you want to talk to that to some extent, like I said, without giving away everything?
Well, there is a lot of, what would you call it, partial understanding commonplace in America, certainly, and I imagine pretty much everywhere, that quantum physics has this weirdness,
Mm,
that the various experiments conducted by the early quantum physicists revealed that if you measure something without touching it, but if you, simply by measuring it, you alter how it behaves.
it's
And
a
we're talking about
perception thing, yeah.
very tiny levels of reality, subatomic particles level of reality, where that has been explored. But the implication is that all of matter is behaving like matter because it's been measured. It's been measured by us, measured by our senses, and that it behaves like matter because we are intelligent observers observing it. So this sort of Jekyll Hyde ability of the energies that make up matter, which is also known as the wave particle duality. So sometimes matter could behave, or energy can behave like matter, and sometimes that energy will behave
Like a
like
wave.
a wave.
Mm.
This is very confounding because we just expect it to behave like energy or like matter all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's weird to us that it could behave as waves.
Mm.
And it remains weird until you appreciate perhaps the deepest discovery of quantum physics, which is what is known as non-locality.
Yes, I found this fascinating. Please go on.
So non-locality is a really awkward word, um, but it's kind of like infinite. Infinite means not finite.
Mm,
So non-local means not local. And local in this context of physics refers to how things work in the three-dimensional world of matter, space, time, and energy that is what has been explored the most by science and understood the best by science. The weird aspect of matter being able to also behave like a wave is really impossible to explain within the local context
mhm.
because nothing else behaves like that. There are no laws that they know of that govern the local three-dimensional space-time that could explain how something could suddenly just turn into a wave of
Yeah.
energy and essentially disappear. So some physicists hazarded the notion that perhaps there is basically another realm that underlies the local three-dimensional physical universe. And that this other realm is two-dimensional, therefore spaceless,
Mm,
therefore timeless, therefore always interconnected. That it is simply, and maybe simple is the wrong term, it is basically a sea of energy.
mm,
And that when seeming bits of matter start behaving like a wave, they do it by having essentially dropped out of this three-dimensional realm and just become once again a part of that infinite sea in non-locality. And then when an observation is made, it pops back into three-dimensional reality as some kind of atom or molecule. So it's perhaps a little easier to explain these various kinds of quantum weirdness, especially entanglement, when you introduce this idea of non-locality, this idea of another realm that has its own set of laws that are different than
mm.
this realm. So with entanglement, the way that the most frequently used experimental process for looking at how entanglement works is a photon is split in half. Now, photon already is sort of a weird idea. A photon is light behaving as a particle
Mm,
because not only does what we think of as matter, quote unquote matter, have the ability to behave as matter or as a wave, energy, which mainly behaves as a wave, can also behave as matter, as a
yeah.
particle, as a point. So when clever physicists are able to split
Mm,
a photon, the particle form of a light wave, in half, they can then send each of those two halves away from each other at virtually the speed of light. And there's a principle in quantum physics, which I won't try to explain in great detail, but essentially it says those two now independent seeming particles have to have opposite properties. So to very simplify it, if one has a certain kind of spin, the other is going to have the opposite spin.
mhm.
So they know this by having experimented on many different ways, that when they observe one particle, the other particle will always have the opposite properties. So this is kind of a well-proven axiomatic aspect of reality. But with entangled particles, if they get really, really far away from each other, let's say thousands of miles, theoretically they could be as far apart as the opposite ends of the universe. But even if they were that far apart, if you observed one of them, the other would instantly manifest the opposite properties,
Yes, I
no
love
matter how far apart they are. So what physicists scratch their head over is that information being sent from one particle to the other faster than the speed of light. And the relativity theorists come in and say nothing can go faster than the speed of light. So that's not possible. But nonetheless, the phenomenon occurs that no matter how far apart they are, when you measure one, the other has the opposite properties instantaneously.
I
So,
love the significance of that for astrology. You know, people saying, "Well, how can?" My father used to say, how can Jupiter, all those miles away, affect us here on Earth?" And I'm like, "Well, here's how." You know, it's
because the effect is coming non-locally
mm,
in some ways of Jupiter. And so one of the things you have to understand is once those particles, which are now half the size of the original photon, they're smaller, half the energy in those um, photons. As they move away from each other, they are no longer observed and they start to behave like waves of energy, which is another way of saying they disappear into non-locality. So non-locality, there is no distance.
yes, that's it. That's why
So
we can be
if
affected
one
by
of
little old
them,
Pluto way out on the ends of the edge of the solar system.
so if one of them is observed, its photon twin, the wave of its photon twin, has no distance between it. They're interconnected in non-locality. And as soon as the first one is observed, the second one pops into reality, no matter how far apart they are. So it's the magic, if you will, of non-locality that begins to explain these things.
Yeah.
But what is more fascinating to me, and maybe fascinating to our listeners, is that non-locality sounds an awful lot like the astral regions.
Mm.
Non-locality is two-dimensional, pure light, interconnected, spaceless sea of energy. And the astral regions are interconnected seas of light. The missing difference, the fundamental missing difference, and the most important missing difference is that the astral regions are described as being very organized, and that, as Yogananda's spiritual teacher put it, Sri Yukteswar, that when you're in your astral body, you exist as a coordinated image of light, an intelligently coordinated image of light. So in spiritual teachings, the astral regions are coordinated. They're intelligently ordered, if you will, where non-locality in quantum physics and even in string theory and M theory doesn't necessarily have any organization. But it's fundamental to non-locality is fundamental to the theories that come to us through quantum physics and string theory and M theory. It's essential to explain how our physical universe can exist at all. So what they're saying is without non-locality and without this vast sea of energy that exists in non-locality and without its intimate relationship to locality, to our three-dimensional physical universe. Without that, the three-dimensional physical universe simply can't exist.
Mm.
And this is also the way the astral regions are described in terms of their part of the mechanism of the creation of Earth. That it is, according to sort of fundamental metaphysical spiritual teachings, that, and it's sort of encapsulated with the phrase, as above, so below.
I was going to talk about the Hermetic principles
Yeah,
at some point.
yeah. So
Thank you
it's
for
the
going
Hermetic
there.
principle writ large, which is the above is the astral region's template and energy to allow for the creation of its counterpart, its physical counterpart. And near-death experiencers say that the astral heavens are the sort of clear, bright, fully luminous plans or templates for what is then manifested in a more crude material, which is matter. And
Mm.
so the physical world doesn't have the exquisite beauty and unlimited aspect of reality that exists in the astral regions, but it's very much a reflection of it.
Yes. And that leads to another Hermetic principle, thoughts create reality, doesn't it? Which is what we've been
Yes.
touching on. Mm.
So that's sort of the next level up in spiritual teachings, which is that these purely energetic realms are the result of purely thought-filled realms. It's hard to imagine a thought-filled realm, frankly,
Yes.
because it is by its very nature formless.
Mm.
Form doesn't even exist as something until the thoughts translate into energy, and that energy can take this coordinated form and then in turn manifest the physical universe or multiple physical universes. Part of the picture of M theory and string theory is that this non-local sea of energy essentially has unlimited potential for more bubble universes, as they're often referred
Or a bit
to
like
exist.
C.S. Lewis's Narnia book, where he describes the world between the worlds in The
Yeah,
Magician's Nephew, and they jump into a puddle and end up in a different
right,
alternative universe. Sorry.
right. No, it's true. And even in the astral universes, they're described by spiritual teachers as having multiple uh, planets, thousands of planets that you can go to and visit that are filled with people on varying levels of consciousness, varying
Mm.
levels of awareness of their greater and greater reality. So there's a nice congruency between non-locality and how it's described in particular by string theory and also by M theory. M theory is kind of the most accepted version of string theory, but they both have this idea that the majority of energy that exists outside the physical universe,
Mm.
and that you may have heard at one point because it made the rounds through popular, uh, you know, not fiction. I'm looking for
Popular culture.
popular culture. Thank you. That string theorists say there are 10 dimensions or 13 dimensions, or, take your pick. And the reason why that was bandied about is because what they discovered, the string theorists, and all of this was an outgrowth of quantum theory, is that the three dimensions that exist in our physical universe, four if you talk about time as well, but the three physical dimensions can't hold all the energy that needs to exist for them to exist.
Right.
And so this forced quantum theorists to become string theorists, many of them, to say, well, these dimensions must exist somewhere else that have all this extra energy in. And those extra dimensions began to be referred to as branes, branes.
Mm. Yes.
Brain is a contraction of membrane. So it's something that divides. So even though the non-locality is uh, effectively an infinite sea of energy, it is still divided into densities of energy. You have lower densities and higher densities. And curiously enough, the number of brain layers that are often said to exist by M theorists is 7.
Right.
And
Interesting.
interesting,
Yeah.
since there is also the most common number of heavens
Is 7.
that are put forward by various religions
Mm-hmm.
and spiritual teachers is also 7.
Yep. And
And the
we
highest
work with
heaven
the
is the
seven
seventh
visible
heaven.
planets in astrology. There's that emphasis on the 7 visible planets as well. So from
Right?
ancient times. So sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. So those layers that are mathematically derived by M theory conform very well to the notion that the astral regions are themselves layered and that there are lower regions. And then gradually we work up. We keep going to school in the astral regions after we've graduated from this school. And we rise higher and higher in these various layers of heaven until we reach the highest layers. So again, to me, there's a fascinating and undeniable congruence between these theories in physics and the sort of basic fundamentals of sort of the religious description, the spiritual description of reality.
Mm.
And the last piece, which I find the most, it answers the most questions for how science could support spiritual teachings, or what answers it could offer for how spiritual teachings describe reality, is what's called the holographic principle.
Ah, yes.
Now, the idea that our physical universe is a hologram has been popularized. And unfortunately, we have many, many adherents of the notion that our physical universe is like part of a giant video game, and that we're being played, we're characters, we're avatar pieces in a giant video game.
My kids are
And
always referring to a non-player character or NPC or something like that,
right,
which is
right,
terrible.
right. So that is kind of where it went in popular culture, but where it came from, where it originated, was in M theory. And what M theory's um, mathematics has forced it to conjecture is that the physical universe and everything in it, including you and me, are holographic projections from non-locality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that the template looks much like the reality we live in. It's finer and better, more beautiful, but our physical world is the slightly grosser, more pixelated version
Yeah.
of that template. And where I find this ties everything together the best and the most fascinatingly is that also a very integral part of all the sort of universal spiritual teachings is that you and I have astral bodies,
Mm.
and that our astral bodies are integral to our physical health, our physical well-being, and in fact, create our physical bodies, right? So M theory is saying the exact same thing, is that there is a energy template in the non-local realm that is continuously manifesting, continuously projecting each and every one of our bodies as physical holographic projections.
Mm. And so, therefore, with the idea that thoughts create reality, we can affect our bodily projection through our thoughts. Would that be an accurate connection?
Yes, and in fact, we're doing it all the time.
Mm.
If you have a positive thought, happy thought, an inspired thought, something that expands your awareness, awakens your feeling, that will translate down into your astral body by making it have a bigger aura, having more energy, but also into a very infinitesimally small level that affects the very atoms in our body through that holographic projection. So in a given day, we probably change far more as a physical body than we would ever believe.
Yes.
That billions, trillions, quadrillions of atoms are affected within our physical form through the course of a day routinely.
Mm. So living in a state of fear produces over time, long periods of time in a state of fear or a state of stress, negative outworkings in the physical body, whereas the opposite is also true. And this is I guess it starts to go down the road of vibrational medicine, doesn't it? How we
Very
are,
much so.
yeah.
It's the basis of vibrational medicine, which is this holographic principle.
Mm.
Now, that's saying it's the holographic principle is confirming of spiritual truths, but it's just as true to say, as above, so below.
Mm.
In other words, we're just using two different ways of looking at reality to describe the same reality. So in the uh, teachings that affect our health, anything we do, any thought we have, any emotion we have, any belief we have is going to affect our astral body, which is in turn going to affect the physical body.
Yes.
We do it all the time, but we don't do it to the degree of difference that would stand out. You know, when we get up in the morning, we look in the mirror, we're pretty sure we saw that guy yesterday, right? Or that gal yesterday. You
Yes.
know, there's not a lot of change.
Mm.
The change that does happen is subtle and or just hidden because most of it's going on inside.
Yes.
So emotions affect, our organs, and our organs function better or function worse depending on those emotions, the type of emotions, and how long those emotions go on for. But we don't necessarily see them. We get some sort of distress signal from the body finally, like we're tired all the time, or
Mm.
we're not seeing well, or we're not digesting our food, or, these are the distress symbols that finally come to our attention. But they're all the result of, in this case, negative changes that were going on within us, could have been over a matter of years.
Mm.
The opposite is also true, that as our beliefs become more unlimited and as our emotions become more positive, our health improves and we don't get distress signals. We have long periods where we remain healthy, and if we get sick for some reason or another, we recover more quickly because that template, that intelligently guided energetic template that is our astral body, is continuously projecting a healthy body.
Yes. Beautiful. It's just amazing how it all works and how it all ties in together this way. I maybe I'm taking things down a different. Oh, well, no, I won't go down that road yet. I'll go down that road in a minute. But I wanted to just mention that you wrap up a lot of the work in this book with the emphasis on meditation and how powerful that is as a spiritual tool to, I guess, work scientifically with our life on the planet. Did you want to talk to meditation for a moment?
I always love to talk about meditation.
Yes.
I managed to wedge it in just about any interview that I'm in. Um, Meditation, in its simplest definition, is a way to methodically calm our body, calm our mind, calm our emotions so they don't overwhelm our awareness.
Mm,
And when we can get our body to be still, we can get our emotions calm and centered, and we get our thoughts not no longer zipping about and racing about. When we reach that kind of calmness, and early on in that spectrum of reaching that kind of calmness, we begin to perceive the subtle reality that is our astral body.
mm,
We start to feel what we are at a deeper level.
mm,
It's always what we are, but we're not aware of it because we're caught up in the sensory experience that we're having through the physical body. And so if we don't do something like meditate, chances are we won't ever have a subtle experience of our astral body because we're just not paying attention to it. But if you use meditation as it's primarily meant to be used, it's also used as a way to develop concentration, to improve your health, to reduce stress. These are all, good reasons to use meditation. And it is very effective at all of those things. But if you go a little bit further with it than what those three purposes are and go deeper and deeper into the stillness and deeper into focus, then you begin to experience yourself as something so much more wonderful than what you experience in just your sensory awareness of the physical body. It's when you tune into divine love, into peace, into divine energy, but above all, into divine joy.
mm.
Yogananda describes and even defines God as ever new joy, a joy that never tires, a joy that never becomes stale. It's not like we might become happy because we have a new possession, but inevitably we'll get tired of that possession and it won't produce that level of happiness for us that it did before. Where ever new joy is just that. It's always joyous. It never becomes old. And that definition of God, by extension, is the definition of the soul. We are ever new joy.
I
So
think
when we meditate and touch into that, that is the biggest benefit. That is the biggest payoff, if you will, of meditating is to be touch that joy, to become saturated with that joy. And once you have that experience, you realize, oh, this always was and always will be the real source of health and happiness.
it's interesting. I think I can't remember his name. You might know his name. The guy who wrote Power versus Force.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
in
Is
his,
that Hawkins?
I think it's Hawkins, yeah. In his hierarchy of vibrational states, joy is at the top, above love, above other things. I'm sure it's joy that gets the
Yeah.
top Guernsey, which totally aligns with what you're speaking to here about the results of
A
meditation.
little bit of Australian slang just went there. What's a top Guernsey?
I think that might actually be British. So
Ah,
it's, oh gosh, that's a good question. What is it? Like it's the top. Well, I see a Guernsey as like a rugby jumper, and you get like the number one Guernsey. Do you know what I mean? When
ah,
in a team of rugby players. So I think it's actually more British than Australian, but we're a Commonwealth country, so we've
of course.
inherited a lot of sayings like that. But that's the meaning that I'm putting to it. It's
Yeah.
number one. So,
I always love to be able to use new slang with people that are
oh,
my friends. So
you come visit us in Australia, Joseph, and we'll fill you up with slang.
I'm sure
I've
you will.
corrupted David entirely with our Australianisms. But before we wrap up this amazing conversation, I do want to ask you a couple of questions that were triggered in my mind as I read your amazing book. And that is, you might cringe when I say this, but the topic of ether, which was removed from the periodic table back in, I think,
Hmm.
it's the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we had a lot of changes happening to the education system at that time as well. And and so I'm interested in your perspective on what ether is, and does it not tie into what we were talking about with this second dimension and non-locality?
Hmm. Well, I can give you the description that Yogananda
Yes.
has for it. But as you say, science sort of abandoned it
Mm,
because they were wanting to make a substance out of it. They were wanting it to
yeah.
be something that was measurable in the same way that matter is. So they kind of let go of it. But the way Yogananda described it is ether is space.
Yeah.
Ether is, and he said that space serves as a boundary that separates us from the astral regions.
Mm,
So it's both this three dimensionality that we have, but it's also, in a real way, a thing. It's a substance. It's just not a measurable substance by the current scientific instrumentation, but it's very much a real thing. And it is, without it, we really couldn't exist as a three-dimensional universe.
I find it fascinating. I mean, I believe that Nikola Tesla based a lot of his work on the idea of the principles of ether, and Dayton Miller did a lot of experiments that um, he worked initially with the Michelson-Morley duo, and then broke away and
Mhm.
did his own experiments, which you're probably well aware of, that actually proved that ether was in existence. But I think a lot of that work of Dayton Miller was put aside as relativity had become a big thing in the media at
Right,
the time.
right. Well, the Michelson-Morley experiments were actually not intended, as they eventually did do, but they weren't intended to prove that um, light travels at a fixed speed in, beyond the
The
atmosphere
atmosphere,
in
yeah.
space. But they had to conclude that light did that because they used light in an experimental apparatus as a way of detecting ether.
Mm,
And they reasoned that ether, if ether was there, it would slow light down,
yeah.
and that therefore it was traveling through something rather than nothing. But they found that light traveled at its maximum speed, if you will, regardless of their experimental conditions.
Yeah.
And so, in some ways, that same experiment that proved the constancy of the speed of light disproved the current theories of what ether was
At the
in
time
one
too.
go.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's just it's interesting because I know there are a lot of ancient writings about ether, and it kind of made me really sad when I researched into it and saw that we hadn't been taught about it the way we perhaps once were before they removed it from the periodic table. And being that it is intangible, it does have this highly spiritual component or feel to the idea of ether. So. I just
Yeah, but
love
I
it.
think the word gets used in different ways in different spiritual teachings. I think in some ways, um, ether or etheric is really used as a description of the astral regions.
Mm,
And so we refer to having an etheric body,
yeah, yeah.
which is in the complexities of the astral body. It said we have actually three layers of astral body, and that, the outermost one, yeah, excuse me, resembles the physical body the most. And then there's another level in, another level in. And sometimes those levels in are referred to as etheric bodies.
Right.
Sometimes the one closest to the physical realm is considered the etheric body. So I think it's used differently in different contexts.
Right. Fascinating. Thank you for answering that. I'm ever curious about these types of things, and
Me
I've just,
too.
yeah, and I've just loved exploring this through reading the book. We actually, David and I went away to this highly energetic area in Australia, to, I guess, celebrate the change of signs of the planet Jupiter into his
Ah, yes.
exaltation sign in tropical astrology, which is Cancer. And it was a lovely thing to do. And Jupiter represents higher knowledge. So perfect that we were reading together your wonderful book at that time. It was a lovely experience, despite all the rain that we had while we were away. So, friends out there in YouTube land, if you are interested in exploring more about Joseph's wonderful work, you can purchase The Physics of God and have a great read, or join his course, which is about to get up and running. The link will be in the description to this video. You can join through my website link as well. There'll be a link at the Learn Astrology page to Joseph's course, which is on the Shift Network. Do you want to just perhaps share a little bit about the Shift Network and your involvement with them?
Well, I don't have any long-standing involvement with them, although I've known about them for a long time. They do a lot of high-quality courses with many, many hundreds of spiritual teachers, healers, scientists that are all very, very good quality. So I've enjoyed working with the people at Shift Network, and they're really just their fundamental purpose is to share knowledge with the world, to get the higher truths out to as many people as possible.
Wonderful, wonderful. So once again, links in the description below. It'll take you to my website where you can then access directly Joseph's course. So thank you so much, Joseph, for your time in sharing all your amazing plethora of knowledge on this topic with us. It's been really inspiring and uplifting once again. And I just thank you for your time.
And I thank you for having me. I always love talking about this.
Me too. Always an absolute pleasure, and we'll have to have you back again soon. Thank you, everybody.